Some of the most iconic monsters from the Monster Manual of Dungeons & Dragons are making their way finally to Magic the Gathering here in the latest set, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Let's take a look at how these cult classic creatures translate over to MTG. We're talking the Tarrasque, Mimics, and even the highly anticipated Owlbear. Now, before we start, I just want to provide a link to a few videos. You'll see them on the screen or in the description down below. That I had some predictions I had made regarding monsters I thought would be making it into Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. So I'll be referring to those videos a lot through this video, and we can see where I got it right and where I got some things wrong. We have the real cards spoiled now, so let's see where we land. I'll also try to provide those who previewed these cards in the description as well to give them credit. Now, let's get on to the video. First off, we have the Mimic. This is a 2 generic mana artifact treasure. You can tap and sacrifice it, and it'll act just like a normal treasure token, giving you 1 mana of any color you choose. But you can also pay another 2 generic mana to turn this into a 3/3 shape-shifting artifact creature token until end of turn. Overall, this is a pretty uninspired design. Does it do the job of translating what a Mimic is in D&D into an MTG setting? Well, kinda, but just barely. It's a treasure chest that can also be a creature, but it's missing the soul that is the Mimic. I remember in my prediction video that I wanted to see a little bit more flair. Like maybe this is a token given to an opponent, and if they use the wrong token, it's flipped and does something nasty to their side of the board. Or maybe perhaps it'll start a little shell under the cup game for yourself, where you get 3 treasure tokens, but 1 secretly a Mimic that deals damage to you if you use it. There's a lot of ways that a Mimic could have been portrayed, and this is really the most bare bones version. Still, it's a neat little common, a treasure when you need it, and a 3/3 body when you don't, for a pretty low cost. Still, it doesn't shake things up too much. Next, Minion of the Mighty, and the surprising return of kobolds to Magic the Gathering. This is a 0/1 kobold for 1 red mana. It has Menace and Pack Tactics, which is a new mechanic coming in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, which reads, whenever Minion of the Mighty attacks, if you attack with creatures with total power 6 or greater this combat, you may put a dragon creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Whew, for dragon lovers, no wonder this is a rare. Okay, so back when I was predicting cards, I mentioned that kobolds need to make an appearance, but I wasn't sure how they were going to take that old creature type and re-envision it with a D&D aesthetic. Clearly they've done just that, and I applaud them for their bold stance. See what I did there? No, seriously though, this is a great mix of D&D kobolds and MTG kobolds. Obviously this has the kobold creature type, but it's given a much needed artwork and design change that matches more with the kobolds from D&D. I mean, just look at the old MTG kobolds, right? I'm glad we're moving away from these, yeesh. So for this card in particular, I'm gonna say this was a great adaptation of a D&D creature into the MTG multiverse. Plus, hey, dragon synergy is a thing and I'm here for it. Of course, having a base power of 0 is an issue, but you can either attack alongside another dragon or buff this thing out of the gourd with Menace. It's not the worst thing to attack in with. Still, you do put yourself at a risk of 3-for-1ing yourself, so watch out. Moving on, we have the all too famous Owlbear. But maybe you're not a fan of D&D and you haven't heard of the almighty Owlbear. And all I can say to you, sir, is shame. The Owlbear demands all of our respect, and now it's hitting our playmats as a common in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. This is a 4/4 bird bear for 3 generic and double green with trample and keen sense, a keyword ability for this monster in D&D that also makes it as a keyword in Magic the Gathering that when it enters the battlefield it draws you a card. Very fitting. So obviously this isn't the most standout card in this set, but for limited play, I would love to draft a 4/4 trample for 5 that also replaces itself as it enters. That's an insanely solid common that I'd always be happy to see. That being said, when I predicted an Owlbear card in MTG, I sort of envisioned it as basically a bear like a 2/2, only it counted as a bird and a bear. I know. Sort of boring, yeah, but it would have played into the Owlbear being a meme in D&D as well as being a bear meme in MTG. So much memeing. Still, they added a bit more flair than I was expecting to Owlbear for Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, and I must admit, it's a lot better than I thought it would be. Good on them, the Owlbear must be respected. Next, we have the all too famous, the cult classic, Gelatinous Cube. This is a 4/3 ooze for 2 generic and double black with 2 keyword abilities. Engulf, when it enters the battlefield, exile target non-ooze creature an opponent controls until Gelatinous Cube leaves the battlefield. And Dissolve, pay X and 1 black mana, put target creature card with mana value X exiled by Gelatinous Cube into the owner's graveyard. I know, that's a lot of text and 2 different abilities, why so fancy? But believe me, it's way more simple than it reads. Basically what the Gelatinous Cube does is exile a creature, then later has the ability to destroy that creature. One of the biggest downsides of these exile card effects is that removal would essentially 2-for-1 you, destroying your creature and oftentimes returning their own creature who had been exiled earlier. That same caveat still exists with Gelatinous Cube, but with the added benefit of possibly destroying that exiled creature before your opponent has a chance to free it. This is a really cool design for the Gelatinous Cube, far better than my ooze with death touch idea. This has so much flavor, especially when these keywords are actual abilities found in D&D for this monster. I love that addition in Adventures of the Forgotten Realms, guys, and it's not just on this card, you see this all over the set. It really ties these 2 games together. Anyway, I see this being a really strong card, especially if you can pair it with some sort of flicker effects. So long as your opponent doesn't have an answer, you can keep engulfing and dissolving until their entire board is slime. And finally, we get the big drop, the keystone of the D&D monsters, the Tarrasque, a creature of untold legends and a durability to match. But how does that size, strength, and resilience translate to MTG? This is a 10/10 Dinosaur for 6 generic and triple green, so mono green decks, here we come. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, it gains haste and ward 10. Whenever it attacks, it fights target creature a defending player controls. And just like in D&D, it's a legendary, so there can only ever be 1 Tarrasque. Where do we begin with this thing? In my prediction video, I said the Tarrasque would have to be huge to match the ginormity of the creature in D&D, and at 10/10, they certainly didn't disappoint there. Although, it could have been bigger, I'm just saying. Ward is a mechanic returning from Strixhaven, which means an opposing player must pay the ward cost as mana if they are targeting a creature with ward. With ward 10, this essentially means that the Tarrasque has hexproof. Okay, so it's not real hexproof, but come on. No one can realistically pay 10 mana on top of a spell's cost to target the Tarrasque. Which is great because in D&D, the Tarrasque is highly resilient to spells. This is something I mentioned in my prediction video, so I'll pat myself on the back for being spot on here. The Tarrasque also has a famously big appetite. It eats anything and everything. This fight mechanic tied to the card is pretty paralleled with that. I sort of laughed off the idea that maybe the Tarrasque could have Annihilator, but this is a pretty close analog, and let's be honest, Annihilator would have been a little bit OP if not a little bit more flavor accurate. The only thing missing that I would have loved to see is the Tarrasque's grounding ability. In D&D, it has an aura that prevents flying around it. I would have loved to see some sort of creatures with flying your opponent control lose the keyword flying ability on this card, but oh well, you can't have everything you want. Still, this is a great representation of one of the most famous monsters in all of Dungeons & Dragons. And I'm not at all disappointed in the Tarrasque found in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. And there you guys go, some awesome cards from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, adding flavor and lore from their Dungeons & Dragons counterparts. As I said, you can catch my prediction videos on these monsters in the video description, and you can see for yourself what I got right and what I got wrong when compared to their real cards. Regardless, let me know what you think about these latest cards from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms in the comment section below. Which are you most excited to try out? If you enjoyed the video, be sure to support the channel by becoming a member, hitting that like button, subscribing, and taking the notification bell. Of course, it all goes a long way in supporting the content here on the Ether Hub, guys. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see ya!